Why was I getting the results in my life and my health and my relationship that other people weren't getting? And I didn't even really stop to think about it until people started coming to us to say, "How did you do it?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, how did you heal your body?" I had endometriosis, hypothyroidism, I'd had migraines, 3 traumatic brain injuries, I'd been in a coma, numerous broken bones. So the list goes on and on and on, fibromyalgia. And when I first got introduced to this work, I was just trying to get my life to suck less.
Welcome to the Way of the Healer Conversations for Change podcast. I'm your host, Darieth Chisholm. Here, you'll meet some of the world's most extraordinary thought leaders and experts, iconic artists and creators, top-performing athletes, successful entrepreneurs, philanthropists, spiritual teachers, shamans, healers, and many, many more. They sit with me, an Emmy Award-winning TV host and former news anchor turned filmmaker and life and business coach, for some powerful conversations for change. What are these conversations about? Healing. Healing all aspects of our mind, body, soul, spirit, this planet, each other, and the systems and structures we're currently living in. You'll learn about topics like plant medicine and psychedelics, spirituality, conscious entrepreneurship, conscious communication, the new earth, quantum leaping, multidimensional living, pleasure, play, and sexuality, breathwork, sound healing, food and supplements, and there's just so much. You're just going to need to subscribe to the channel and listen. Come with me now, behind the curtain, to get the backstory on how and why these remarkable people heal themselves and others, how they lead, what makes them tick, what lights them up, gets them down, keeps them going, and what they believe is the way of the healer. So let's go. I have the amazing Kole Whitty as my guest today on the Way of the Healer podcast. So Kole and her husband Taf founded a company called the Condor Approach that brings a fresh and inclusive approach to healing and transformation with the use of psychedelics and plant medicine. It's built on the principles of inclusivity, collaboration, and reciprocity, honoring spiritual and master teachers in the forms of plants, humans, and animals. As the demand for psychedelics healing continues to grow across the country and, of course, the world, the Condor Approach offers a unique done-with-you method that empowers coaches to integrate transformative experiences with their clients. With more states embracing psychedelics for healing, their belief in mandatory integration guides their training. Kole says that access to tools alone is not enough. It's real-time application and integration that truly makes the difference. On this episode, we talk about confronting trauma and embracing gratitude for even the toughest experiences, and how our bodies hold on to trauma and pain, and how to release it. We also talk about the essential questions to consider before a plant medicine ceremony and journey, and so much more around communities of color, women, and indigenous populations, and how the health, pharmaceutical, and wellness industries are implementing the use of psychedelics. As you can see, a lot to dive into, so please stay until the end and enjoy this episode, and let's go. Plant medicine, psychedelics, and cannabis have really helped me deepen my meditation practice and morning routine. And while you don't necessarily need our plant natural allies to assist you in meditation, I find that with meditation, I'm able to have more clarity, direction, purpose, and allow divine guidance and wisdom to flow through me. Stillness and quieting the mind allows you to access more of who and what you truly are. And that's where you can activate more creative expression and fulfillment of your dreams. As a gift to you, my friends, I've designed a special high-frequency activation to help you encode, embrace, and elevate your consciousness to ignite your creativity and passion. It's free and available for a limited time. Go to darieth.com/meditations to receive a guided meditation series with journal prompts and attuned high-frequency sound waves. That's darieth.com/meditations. We're going to be talking all about medicine and all that it takes to really integrate with plant medicine. But I decided to hit this recorder because we were already riffing on like you decide that you want to not only step into this healing platform and use certain tools, but then you got to know how to use your own tools.
Oh, listen. And you figure out what tools got you to where they could get you, and they're not going to get you any farther. So you're going to have to get some new tools.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But you and Ta are doing amazing work in the world, working with other uh, coaches and people who are working with psychedelics and plant medicine, helping them to understand how important it is to integrate.
Mhm.
How do,
Absolutely.
yeah. So in your own journey and in your own process of understanding that, what was it that brought you both to this place of deciding that integration is not optional?
You know, I don't know that I was brought to a place versus looking in retrospect. Why was I getting the results in my life and my health and my relationship that other people weren't getting? And I didn't even really stop to think about it until people started coming to us to say, "How did you do it?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Well, how did you heal your body? I had endometriosis, hypothyroidism, I'd had migraines, 3 traumatic brain injuries, I'd been in a coma, numerous broken bones. So the list goes on and on and on, fibromyalgia. And when I first got introduced to this work, I was just trying to get my life to suck less. It was like from a scale of 0 to 10, I came into this, if I can get my pain to a 6 consistently, that's enough to get out of bed. That's enough to go live my life, to enjoy family and friends. But in finding the work with psychedelics and, working with plants as teachers and fungi as teachers, that's where I started to, not until then did I see pain-free would ever even be a possibility. And so if I would have heard someone like me, seeing my posts on social media, I'm having this great time, I'm laughing, whatever, and I'm also sharing my crying and everything else. I don't only share, the pleasant parts of it all, but my ability to hold space for both actually increased. My life for so many years was so consumed in pain, there was no room for pleasure, for joy, because it was just so dense and so heavy, and nothing blocks purpose like pain. So it was also another safety mechanism on tons of different levels. And so until I had to, you know, I mean, I'm going to back it up just a smidge to give a little screenshot of how I even ended up getting to the pain point, because that will help, I think, anyone listening to understand what I've had to learn as far as tools and skills to end up here. So the Cliff's Note version, I grew up just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, very conservative, Mormon LDS family, whole community, same thing. And there were events that happened from 8 to 12 that I now label as assaults on my sexuality. Different episode, different topic, or for another day, we'll say. The way that I internalized shame from those experiences made me make decisions in my teens that put me into an at-risk youth category, dropped out of school, I didn't graduate from high school, and ended up in a coma at 17 from a contaminated batch of GHB known as the date rape drug. But we would use it to come down off of stimulants. So it would help you come down so that you don't stay up, because you do need to sleep. And so there was a contaminated batch that put about 9 people in the hospital that night. I got the worst of it. I was the smallest and female. And so I ended up flatlined, dropped off at the hospital under a Jane Doe. And so then I turned that around. I said, well, this path's not going to work. And I didn't want my younger sister to end up like me. So I decided I'd have to find something else to grab onto. And so I did the Miss Utah Teen USA pageant. Now, their platform was substance abuse education. So I told them if anyone could educate youth on the dangers of club drugs, I think I'm your person. And at this point, I'd only been 3 months since my coma. And they said, we agree. So then I became a spokesperson for the DARE program, for Partnership for a Drug-Free America. I was working with the US government on the military chapters for addiction and opioids overseas. And so for me to have to get full circle to come even back to master teachers in plant, animal, or fungi form was a journey in itself. plus the constructs of religion, plus the constructs of, well, then who am I after telling millions of people from national talk shows like Montel Williams to magazine articles to wherever? I'm this imposter now that shared my story all those years. And now here I am using, am I really just an addict making an excuse? So there were all these layers of beliefs and identity and constructs and trauma that created a pain body that was so strong, shame, guilt driven, that at 26, I couldn't take another step. Um, that's when the medical conditions were pretty much at their worst. And I was at Disneyland with my, I call him my husband, my first husband. And my body was so swollen, my knees were hurting so bad, I couldn't take another step. And that was my first universal sign that I was going to have to sit down and do some evaluation, that my body would not permit me to take another step in the life I was in the way that I was living it. And that was kind of what kicked off my journey towards working with psychedelics in a healing capacity. Is I had to. I didn't really have a choice. When you get desperate enough, you're willing to do things a whole lot differently.
Yeah.
So that
Two
kicked off my personal journey, and it picked up from there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how you're working with other people who are actually working to support people who are using psychedelics. But two things that I'd love to kind of go back on is that this concept of these are drugs, right? And paralleling them or comparing them with other drugs, right? And that notion that keeps people away from the use of plant medicine and psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is very steep. And most of that obviously is conditioning and things that people hear. But how is it that people can come to understand that we're not talking about street drugs and what that, or even alcohol for that matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about is a highly intelligent plant medicine that has the wherewithal to heal not only the physical, but also the mental, emotional, and spiritual.
100%. And that you said some very key things there is the intelligence difference. And it's something that when someone's very skeptical, it's a hard thing to convince anyone, right? And so I think one of the greatest entry points to that is really studying some of the indigenous cultures that it's been a part of their practice for a really long time. There's obviously great documentaries and kind of ways to bridge these ancient technologies and these more modern practices and ideas. But ultimately, if we even just compare it to religion, prayer, or having visions or prophecies or all of that, I think that it goes deeper into the fear that if I question my beliefs, then I'm questioning my religion, and that I can't hold psychedelics and my religious beliefs in the same container. And so the invitation, I think, when it comes to curiosity is places like Peru, where many of the tribes have actually even taken on Christian beliefs, but they still have the indigenous practices, because that's the evolution since the conquerors went to Peru, for example. And so my invitation really is always to question the resistance, because that resistance is fear-based. And if we are certain in our belief, if we know our beliefs to be true, then leaning into curiosity shouldn't pose as a threat. And so my thing usually with people is if they're feeling that big resistance, like, oh, it's a drug, that fear-based thing, fear and contraction put us in a state of dis-ease in the body. And the more we are uneasy, the more our body is creating a environment for dis-ease to live. And so if we say on one hand that we want to be fearless and strong and grow, but not that's bad, that is, I think, inviting the same kind of dysfunction that's not working for people. And so I understand the fear parts, especially with addiction and what we've been conditioned into. I think that even by looking at the research, what it's doing for veterans and PTSD and veterans who also used substances or are on such severe pharmaceutical drugs that do have bad outcomes, that prolonged use degrade them, that the best place to start is look at some of the indigenous practices historically, and then look at some of the newer research if you have a hard time kind of bridging that gap, we'll say. because the research is even showing people are having very mystical experiences, seeing God, seeing a loved one that passed on. And so we can hide from it, or we can at least lean into the research if that's safe for you, or into the indigenous practices and what it really is to understand the intelligence of it. It's not a chemical reaction that's happening. It's just in the research, they don't talk about the more, they'll just call it, they had a mystical experience, when really it is the mystical experience that impacts most so deeply.
Yeah. And so that takes me to the question about when the physical body was so broken down and you had to begin to make the changes, how is it that the use of psychedelics were able to help you physically? Because I think most people have the association of what is happening to my brain or what am I feeling spiritually, but there's also obviously the strong connection to the physical body.
Yes. And so, and most people are associating like pharmaceuticals. If I take a, painkiller, it's killing pain or dissociating me from the pain on some level. With these power plants and master mushrooms, what they're doing is actually allowing us to see what's causing the pain. So, for example, for me, my endometriosis, from what I was shown and has been inactive now since 2009, I haven't had a laparoscopy. So I think we can settle on the fact that it is quite effective if we're this far down the line. For me, my endometriosis was internalized shame from the assaults on my sexuality from 8 to 12. So as I started to mature, my first cycle was the same weekend as the Hello Dance for high school. That was the first night I had to go and get an emergency. I was having an ovarian torsion. And so in one of my psychedelic experiences, I was shown how those years of shame turned me in on myself and was almost rejecting my sexuality, my reproductive area as a result. And so I had to go through a process of self forgiveness. Yes, forgive the parties involved and however that rippled to them, but most importantly, to forgive myself. And
Mm.
in that forgiving process, also look at all the other times that I did not honor my body, that in my relationships maybe leaned into intimacy when I didn't want to because I felt a sense of obligation. So it wasn't non-consensual from my mind, but my body was saying no. And there was a process of forgiveness with me and my mind, me and my childhood, me and my body, and making commitments to listen more closely to the cues of my body, to honor my body, to get consent from my body in all ways. And that helped me to release that shame. And that ever since then has been the difference. And so when I started to timeline, because all these injuries and broken bones and illnesses, then I got curious. If that was that, then what else might my body have been saying that I'm missing? And so I went back to, since even in my birth story from my mother, and I timelined my whole life up to that point and looked at every illness, strep throat, bronchitis, pneumonia. I mean, anything I could think of, accidents, crash on my bike. And I looked at what part of the body was impacted. And then I looked at what was going on in my external environment. And I found a really interesting pattern that when I got a physical accident or illness, like we'll say, for example, like my collarbone I broke in elementary school and I was getting nonstop strep throat. It's around the throat chakra, or just the throat in general. Communication, expression. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like I could speak up. And so when I started to look at all these injuries and just track them, I just found these fascinating connections. And then I became obsessed. Then I started to track everything. And that's what started to develop into what we do now. Is it was literally just my relentless commitment that pain-free might be possible. Then if this can heal, then maybe other things can too.
Yeah, and let's talk about this approach that you use when you work with clients that obviously both you and your husband have used personally, and how that helps people when they are utilizing plant medicine and or psychedelics to really integrate that into our chakra system, but then into our physical body as a full manifestation of making those shifts and changes that might be locked into whatever emotional programming we have.
So we call it the Condor Approach. And like you said, things get locked in because our body's comprised of habits. And so there's instinctual habits, that are based off of past experiences. So if as a child I got stung by a bee, I may be afraid of bees now and react. That's not consciously, right? It's that my body made an association, this thing is dangerous, or to stay away from this thing. And so what that allowed me to do is I started to define, okay, what has my body been through in the past, made this own little map. Then people started to ask me, well, how? And then I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm integrating. And so what integration is to me is when we take the big realization, and it could come from plant medicine experience, it could come from a ketamine session, it could come from a Tony Robbins event, right? A breath work session. Integration is the action we take, consciously or not, after a big realization. But a big realization without action stays a dream. It doesn't come into the 3D. And so when I say integration, I'm talking about the intentional actions after a big breakthrough or realization. And it doesn't have to be big, but just after anything. After pregnancy, after giving birth, after a divorce, after graduating from high school, after, retiring from being a medical professional, all those things, we have to integrate old identities, new identities, the people in the environment around us. And so for us, integration, when it's done intentionally, is the difference in doing it with more ease and flexibility and resiliency, because we're not taught that.
Yeah.
And
I
so
would have,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, and I would imagine that integration looks different for everyone and is a different process depending on what it is that we're integrating.
Yes, exactly. So I look at it like a sandcastle, right? So we can build and construct this beautiful sandcastle, then a wave comes in and wipes out the sandcastle. With intention, we can create it the way that we want. The way that you want your sandcastle to look is not going to be like me. And what you want right now might not be the same thing you want 2 years from now. And so it was, how do we do a unique process that is individual, but it's still repeatable and it's measurable? Because what we don't track, we can't change. And there's this interesting dichotomy when it comes to working with these master teachers of not controlling it and at the same time having influence. So when I'm doing integration, it's like, okay, so just like a broken bone, if a bone gets broken, it gets disintegrated. It's going to heal no matter what. Someone's going to heal no matter what, but that doesn't mean it heals optimally. If you've seen someone with a severe scoliosis or a deformity, it healed that way. But when we heal intentionally, that's like putting a cast on an arm or making sure it's in the proper position so that it can heal for the most optimal outcome in the future, that it's usable and ideally stronger and better than before. But just like a cast, you can't stay on SSRIs forever. I mean, you can, but it's going to have other adverse events. You can't, anytime you're going to have a support structure, there has to be other means to strengthen the person, the process. Just like a cast has to come off, we have to build resiliency and strength. And so when it comes to integration, what we're really looking to do is on a daily basis, what do you track that matters to you? Is it for one person, I want to be kinder with how I handle my kids? Like they don't deserve to get my stress from my job or being a single parent or whatever. That's not their fault. And yet I'm projecting at them. So what is the plan? We call it the what happens when. So by having the same questions to ask yourself, you're self-sourcing. It's between you, God, your ancestors, your spirit guides, whatever that is for you. But there are certain questions we found that everyone can benefit from because it's just helping them to answer it for themselves every day. And simplified, it's, are you being the version of yourself you want to be? And if not, what is it? What do you need to know, do, be, or understand to support that, to elevate that, to expand it? So that's the simplified of what the approach does, is to help people trust themselves and come up with a plan.
Did you know that beyond this podcast that I help busy entrepreneurs, storytellers, artists, creatives, and healers who might be feeling a little bit bored and burnt out and trying to figure out what to do next and what's my purpose in life, really find those answers? How? I say it's through shifting. It's just a matter of shifting your vibration and your frequency to higher states of consciousness and awareness in order to find the answers and live the life that we truly desire to live. So if you want to become a deliberate, conscious creator who is enjoying the creations and the manifestations that you are experiencing in life, then I invite you to be a part of a very special 5-week intensive. You can get all the details at darieth.com/shift to learn more. You can experience wholeness, personal freedom, expanded states of creativity, confidence, and flow while achieving your goals and flourishing in your unique gifts and talents. After this podcast episode, please head over to darieth.com/shift to learn more about it.
To support that trust.
I should point out that some of those questions and some of the information that you provide within the Condor Approach is included in the free guide that we have available, that is How to Begin Your Plant Medicine Journey. We'll make sure that we include a link to that free guide in the show notes of this episode, as well as if you're watching on YouTube down below. I think you'll find that very useful, and that was provided to us in part from Kole and Ta and many others that we worked with to develop the guide. So you'll find that. You'll also get all of the links and information to reach out to her as well. So to continue on with the conversation, so this idea that integration is not optional, it's clear just based on the conversation that we've had, is that whatever experience someone is having, that time afterwards to have it fully integrated and make meaning of it is so very important. What happens when we don't?
Well, you're going to heal the way that you heal. And what's really challenging is when you connect to the divine in these ways, when you have these big realizations and you return back to an environment, now you know what doesn't work. Now you know how far you might be from where you want to be, and you can't unknow what you know. And it can actually make someone's health degrade faster, because ignorance, as they say, is bliss. And so when we say, I want to know the truth, so we seek the truth, but then we are unwilling to make the changes necessary, then it's almost, we call it multi-construct strain. Now there's who I believe myself to be, who I want to be, who I'm building to be. And then there's the old identities that weigh us down, that get us more frustrated, that get us, because for me, it's literally creating a tension point that it's going to keep bending until it breaks. So if you have a big realization and you bring intentionality, we can come up with a blueprint. Right? For me, it's like remodeling a house. If someone says, I'm done, I don't want to do this life anymore, and they go to the jungle for 30 days and do ayahuasca for, 10 times and whatever, they go the harder, faster, more now approach to it, thinking I'll just bust through all my trauma in 30 days. What can happen is it's like remodeling a house. You just go start blowing out walls, but you don't know what are load bearing. You don't understand on the other infrastructure of the constructs that create you, that literally help you operate day to day, can get so compromised that the whole ceiling collapses in. You can't work. If your kids depend on you for insurance, for other reasons, too much too fast can be a collapse of the entire infrastructure. Your traumas create adaptations. Those adaptations help you function. So if you just blow them all out without understanding what they're supporting, it can actually be damaging. And so what often people are doing is they're going for the weekend, then they're going back to work on Monday. But now they have to try to be the person that can do the job, but now they really can't because they had this big realization. And so what happens is more distress can happen because they can't unknow what they know. Yeah. And then maybe no one in their family knows they went and did it, so they get more isolated. Say they went to the jungle and came back home, but they don't have community. For me, without community, I find that isolation can increase, and I see a higher potential of suicide or suicidal ideation at least, because now they feel even more separate from their environment with they're a person out in the middle of the sea, just one little life preserver holding their head above water. But that can make you feel more powerless. That can make you feel more overwhelmed when you realize you have an ocean to swim through versus you thought you were maybe in a lake.
Yeah. Yeah. And this really brings up a really important conversation that I think needs to be had more often, particularly with people who are desiring to head to the jungle for the weekend, or, make sure that they've got it on their bucket list that they have experienced ayahuasca or wachuma or 5-MeO DMT, which we know definitely you need some integration from, and not being able to come back and assimilate the experience, integrate the next steps and move forward. And in fact, as you point out, you could end up doing even more damage to yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's starting to become more common, especially as more people are seeing the documentaries, they're reading the research. And the thing is, the research is saying, look, 6 months later, all these people have almost no effect of their depression. This is a miracle. We're forgetting that they were deeply vetted for the intake process to be the right candidate. And in a controlled environment, of course, we're going to get a better outcome because it is a controlled environment. They have someone checking in on them. They have therapy after. They have talk sessions. This is where, for me, the importance of psychedelic informed coaching is to help kind of bridge that from the jungle or the ancient traditions or the indigenous traditions, or even here in the States, people are coming back from these very big experiences. They don't know what to do next. And so, how do I, okay, great, I saw these entities that told me I have a big mission and a big purpose, and then I come back to sit at my desk in a cubicle, at a call center. How do you reconcile that? And so, those can all have beautiful messages and gifts, but if you don't have anyone there, because most shaman are not coaches, they're not there to help you integrate. It's not part of the tradition. They live integrated. So they don't even really understand what someone would need from that, especially coming from the States for those that have never been here. And so someone has the big experience, they come back, they don't know what to do. So it's almost like they have to either bypass it more, or they start doing what we call journey hopping. So they come back to the States, now they're giving themselves permission to maybe not have to go to Peru. They're willing to explore in the underground because of cost and access. But the problem is they're doing Bufo on Friday, Cambo on Saturday, going in, they're doing hape every morning before work on their lunch break. Hape is a tobacco for those that don't know, and still very addictive, actually, because it's got a lot of nicotine in it. So if you take someone that has a addictive personality, and we'll say how I determine that is lots of caffeine, like just, I would say, consistently looking for a way to give themselves energy. Hape does a beautiful job of that. It also does a beautiful job of clearing your mind and grounding you in the moment of now. But if you don't take actions to clear the chaos and the noise, so you have to rely on a substance or master teacher to do that for you, your body in time will start to show signs of wear. I see a lot of shaman and spiritual workers with liver issues, kidney issues, filtering, because they're filtering all this energy for other people. But the physical body is still a vehicle that must be tended to. And so there's still this disconnect when people come back here and start working with someone in the underground that maybe doesn't know the signs of wear and tear, or nightmares, or potential entity, or potential, like, there's all these other aspects that a lot of folks don't know. And then a lot of times they're not going back and either telling the facilitator that they're not okay, that they're not integrating well, or they're thinking it must be something wrong with me of why I'm not able to integrate this, or they're getting dismissed by facilitators of like, oh no, you're good. You had an ego death. That's good. But the person can't work. It's not good. It's not functional, right?
Yeah.
And so the harm, unfortunately, I'm watching increase exponentially because there's a lack of intake process, and there is a lack of a plan for integration. And every facilitator doesn't need to be an integrator. They need someone to refer to, and they need, and I say need as in for optimal results, we'll say, they do need to bring someone on their team for a smooth handoff that's included in the package, where it's like, you come work with me and then I hand you to, so and so comes in and they're going to care for you these next 30 days minimum, because there's just people go back to work, and then the kids have sports, and then they're back at gymnastics, and they don't take the time and the space really required to embody, and for me, really walk the walk of these master teachers. And so then the next weekend, they're back in it again because they've forgotten. They've slid back into the old ways. But integration is a process, it's a practice. It's not the morning after the journey, it's
Yeah,
a lifestyle.
yeah, and I can certainly attest to that in my own personal experience. It's not, the conversation that you have in the circle right after the journey. It is, in fact, the ongoing process that occurs. And even my own personal experience, I found that the need to be focused on my full integration after having a full year last year of multiple experiences with several different psychedelics and plant medicine, partly because I was filming a documentary, but secondly, because I had access. Did I not feel the entire weight until the end of the year? And I was like, what is happening to me? And that's why I'm just such a firm believer in people really having this full understanding that integration is so different for so many different people, and it is a process that you want to remain open and available to, and having the tools and the resources and the people to turn to when you're trying to move through it. Which I think is so really important. Several more conversations that I want to get into in a moment, but before we pull off the one that we're having about what can physically occur because of people's either multiple journeys or not fully integrating. I believe this also occurs when people also in their first experiences of literally being opened to expanded states of consciousness. And now having this access or communication that they may not have had in the past or may not have been aware of that they had. And now there are these waves of energy that is moving through as one is either expanding into higher states of consciousness or at least opening that up. And so whether they're receiving it through channel or through message, but that can be so full on. And that can happen months after you've had an experience.
Absolutely. I look at it like a fire hose, right? At first, let's say the fire hose is made of paper, because the whole life, that's the only container someone needed because the water was turned down so low, it wasn't going to wear down the paper. So this little hose has water like a straw. It's just dripping through. It has time to dry. But then you start to open up these places and spaces. For us, we call it the logic ceiling. And in essence, it's like we start in a more contracted state when we are in a very stressed state, very contracted, very tight. And then we go into this open state of consciousness, this expansion out, just like your lungs when you breathe, just like your heartbeat. You receive all of this information, but then it does need to contract again, and then it connects through the body. The problem is, when that fire hose get turned up, if you don't learn something like Qigong, other ways to move your energy, spiritual hygiene, things like that I did not ascribe to any of that 15 years ago. I mean, I wouldn't say I was adverse, but again, I grew up LDS. So those things were the devil, evil, whatever. And now I'm wearing crystals on each hand, and I usually have, I've got a Yiming shoe on my neck and all sorts of things. So now I understand the difference after sitting and being in so many containers, how one, I was taking on people's illness and stress. I didn't know. Like I knew I was empathic, like empathetic. I didn't know that I was literally carrying the weight of people on my shoulders. And that's what was causing a lot of my scoliosis, was the pressure on my back. And so as I started to really understand this more, I got way more dedicated to how do I also develop my energetic body or fortify that fire hose to make it a stronger container for all of the pressure moving through. Because if you're going to serve a lot of people, and I don't mean serve medicine, I mean just serve and be in service to people, you're filtering their energy too. So you have consciousness coming from up, you have people around you coming from every direction. If you don't start to really understand the energetic spiritual body, then the physical body doesn't grow with it. They don't always communicate and change at the same pace. Spirit body can happen simultaneously, but the body takes time to acclimate. So for me, I usually say the best way to explore your energetic body is something like Qigong, to really start to feel the difference, and then practicing that in ceremony. When you're walking by people, can you feel the difference in your body around different people? And if you feel kind of crazy in your body in a group ceremony, remove yourself first before you start to dig into what is this quote unquote wrong with me, because you could be picking up someone else's stuff, which that's a different thing to work on than what trauma has me doing this. And then the other thing that I really love is, depending on what's happening in the physical body, if you're feeling very inflexible, your spirit body may benefit from yoga, some more flexibility in the physical body, right? Your spirit body could feel restricted by the physical body. And so by finding more flexibility in the physical body can help allow the spirit body to have more harmony within the structure. Or if I'm feeling very weak in my physical body and strong in my spirit body, then I may want to do heavier lifting to get my body fortified to support the heavier, fuller, stronger spiritual body. So for me, sometimes what's going on in my physical body is trying to show me that there's not harmony with my spirit body and my physical body. And if my spiritual body is bigger and more expansive and my body can't hold the amount, then the body shows signs. That's why I'm obsessed with body tracking, which is part of what we do in the Condor Approach book, is daily tracking, because your body's always giving you signals. It's always giving you cues, but only you can translate what that is for you.
Yeah, and a beautiful point for those healers that might be listening, and or just people who are serving people in whatever capacity, that really paying attention to the body and the signals that you're getting in ways that you can help to move the energy, whether it's physical or spiritual, when you are working with other people, which can be intense in a variety of different ways. So speaking of working with other people and where we're going, if we were to look out 5 to 10 years from now, with now more people being curious about psychedelics and plant medicine, with this wave of psychedelics being now made available for therapists and other uses, what do you see happening, and or what can happen to help to mitigate the growth that is likely about to occur, if it isn't already occurring?
Yeah. I mean, it's already occurring. There's a Dr. Erica Zelfand. Just had a conversation with her a few weeks ago. She's up in Oregon, and she's running the first legal psilocybin therapy. Hers was the first approved from the U.S. government, running in Oregon. And her and I were talking, and she was sharing that right now, at best, she can support 3 clients a week. Now, in our country right now, we've got the numbers vary depending on where you look, but let's just say for the high, it's between 120 and 200,000 therapists in the United States. We have 330 million people here. And so we already have an access issue for mental health. Then if you look at the demographic of therapists, it's 74% white women. So we have communities, if they're not represented, they're not going to feel safe in an environment where they could be going into an altered state, in addition to what has their ancestry, what's in their DNA, what has been through, that has been passed down into their physical body. And so there's so many layers that, again, why the intake process is important, and why therapy alone is not going to be the answer. That's one answer. It's a beautiful answer for people that maybe have contraindications, they're on certain medications, they want to have more of a medicalized model of care, they feel safer there. Fantastic. Cost-wise, not accessible either. Most treatments are ranging between $2,000 and $3,000. Not many people can afford that. The way that insurance is structured, you can only get insurance for portions of the service. So it's not covering, at best 30, 40%. And so moving forward, we're going to see more burnt out therapists because they want to help. And then we're getting this influx of people that want to be psychedelic psychotherapists or psychedelic therapists. But again, if you're coming in with that savior complex, or you want to help people, it's usually to the detriment of yourself. We see that with a lot of healers, nurses, doctors, first responders. When they're in the space, they came to really help people, but then their own body starts to health and they become patients as a result. Happened with my husband. It's happened more times than we can count. And so we've got all these people who have been deeply impacted by psychedelics. They want to help others, but at best, if they can do 3 to 5 sessions per week, that's at burnout, according to the therapists that are doing it at that rate now. Most say they can do 2 to 3 a week because they've got a downtime. It is heavy. You're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with heavy things, and then the energy of it. And so moving forward and kind of looking in this next 5 years, the underground, whether anyone likes it or not, is already having a huge explosion. And if we look at the cannabis industry and we look at the psychedelic industry, the issues that we've seen in cannabis, we're going to see in psilocybin particularly as well, for the sheer fact of to get a license. Like right now it's legal in Oregon, in parts of Colorado, other areas decriminalized to work with psilocybin, but it's gray right now. Once they come up with the regulations of who can have a license under what context and what conditions, then we're going to have a lot of limitation of who has access. Because people with, say, a past criminal record, like we saw with cannabis, aren't going to be able to get a license, which means they're not going to be able to work in their community, or the government programs are so expensive for the licenses, most people can't access them in communities that need it the most. So all of that to say, this is where, for me, psychedelic informed coaching, in my perfect magical world of pixies and butterflies and rainbows and unicorns, every community is educated so they can hold space for their own community, versus having top down support. It's really having that grassroots, the community healing each other, because regardless of whether someone has been a shaman for 15 years or 15 days, someone that feels safe with the person they're sitting with because they look like them, because they understand them, will feel safer to go into themselves to do the work than someone that was maybe medically trained, doesn't look like them, doesn't talk like them, doesn't come from any of the same lived experiences. So for me, this is why I'm so passionate in really doubling down in education on integration, because I believe we're going to also see a massive explosion in home mycology of people growing their own mushrooms, their own medicine. And I would love to see more decriminalization efforts or legalization efforts like we've seen in other countries and places with cannabis, where you can grow your own so people can truly connect to these intelligence in prayer, in music, from inception of, its birth sprouting from the soil, or from, not necessarily soil, but from where it's growing, until connecting to the energy and imbibing with it. And then we would still need support in education and integration and community models, so that we're still doing our work alone, but we're doing it together, so that you can really see each other.
And when you look at people's access and ability, whether they're growing their own and or getting, if you will, through the underground without having those advanced models of therapy, so to speak, or the support that one would need, what do we run the risk of? And I'm talking about particularly in communities that don't have access, that they may have access to psilocybin or other substances, but they don't have access to the type of support that they need for full integration.
I mean, then we can see deeper traumatization. For example, if someone lives in a very violent environment, their potential for wanting to go into altered states and other dimensions to do more spiritual work is higher, because it's a safer place to be. They feel more connected, they feel more fulfilled, they feel like they're a part of something. And then when they come back to gunshots and craziness outside, they still can't get out of that, because now they're only escaping where they currently are to have significance somewhere else, to be a spiritual warrior, but still not able to make the changes in their third dimensional life to improve, we'll say, like the wealth dynamics necessary for them to take care of their kids, to not continue and perpetuate. They're not going to be as present for kids, right, if they're out doing the work in other realms. And so we'll still see trauma continuing in many ways, because the systems aren't changing. Their internal system, but it's internally in consciousness, not in the third dimension. It's not integrating. It's not coming to here,
Right.
because a lot of it lacks the language, because there's still a lack of education in what it is to be in the third dimension. And so we have to have bridges from these ancient technology to the modern ones. The what happens when I had this big realization, now I know that I'm God, I know I'm valuable, I know that I'm worthy. And also understanding the skill of money. How can I create a community model that's a low cost, but that is creating an ecosystem for the community within itself? How do I set up an LLC? How do I pay taxes, even if I'm not selling substances, but I'm, having community gatherings to help support, so that we can have some scholarship versus waiting for top-down government support? Because there's still such a huge gap, and it's only going to grow with AI and other technologies, that if we don't also get in the education of what does it mean if you now think that you're worthy, in helping other people outside of yourself, not only in the realms, so that you can get a healing center, so that you could buy land, so that you could create a safe space for your community that's not on the streets where you live, because that's still not safe. And so there's still such a huge gap between the two. We can't only do spirit, and we can't only do this third dimensional work. It's got to bridge both for the communities to actually change.
I
And
am
so that's
so
what we're committed to.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you and Ta are doing this type of work, because this is so much more than understanding the aspects of integration, obviously, and really working with those people who are choosing to step into the space as healers or providers or facilitators or practitioners or therapists or coach specialists. There's a vast number of people who could have the potential or possibility of working in this space. And as you point out, beyond that comes all of the other things that people also need to be trained and aware of in order to do it successfully for themselves and for others.
And relationships, right? Like, someone can have all these big realizations in the realms, but they still don't know how to communicate to people that are stuck in the old construct where they come from. How do I actually hold space and draw boundaries and be firm and not get triggered into raising my voice, anger, what all the conditioning and trauma has done? And so that's one of the trickiest parts, is now I'm different, but how do I, as a different person, interact with the third dimensional world I'm still living in, to bring healing outside of just giving people mushrooms, because that's not the healing path for everyone. But
Yeah.
for me, when we can help someone to really be the divine articulation of the teachings, we're giving them the language to do so. They
Mm.
can feel it, but they don't often have the language for it. And by bringing the language, they can explain it to other people that aren't having these experiences and maybe never will. But maybe they've got kids where they want to be able to, maybe they've got kids maybe they've got kids that they want to be able to have a better relationship with the parent, with, maybe they want to co-parent more. Maybe they'd like to take on more custody of the kids. Knowing how to communicate that is the difference for the children's future. Otherwise, they're actually just kind of dissociating from it one step further and leaving everyone else behind. So again, it goes back to integration. How do we integrate how it was to how we're going?
What are your thoughts about, particularly as more traditional therapists and people that would have the opportunity to create space in a clinical setting with the use of psychedelics, but don't necessarily have the understanding or wherewithal of how indigenous communities have worked with these medicines for centuries. It's like that piece of it is left out if it's in the clinical setting. What are your thoughts about that?
It comes down to one of my most, I would say, treasured teachers is Malku down in Peru. And he made a beautiful comment before. I have a very different perspective than I did even 5 years ago. I would say I had a much more self-righteous, binary thought process around the medicalized models versus some of the more indigenous practices. And he said to me, tradition is a beautiful thing, but tradition can be a prison. And he's big on the history of shamanism and mysticism. And so he says, a lot of these practices are not actually traditional. They are evolved from traditions, But for us to sell them as that this is the traditional way is not accurate either. And so then it's how do we bring forward the education and that all of these models can exist. My invitation is to people that if you're working in this work in any capacity, make it your point to go and work with a tribe in Peru, or to go down to the jungle, or to go down to Mexico and work with some communities that have been doing it for a long time. There's also a big influx of, and this includes doctors. We've got more doctors going and doing the work, even though they're doing it clinically, to really understand the essence of this is really important, to understand, even if you're working in a medicalized model, is there a way for me to have a contribution within my model to give back to certain communities, right? Like there's so many ways for us to bring it in. I think the misstep is when we try to look at them as not a misstep. I'm seeing a lot of bifurcation where it's like we're going to see psilocybin sold as called something else. It'll get some other clinical name so they could trademark it and patent it and protect it and all of that stuff, which is why for me, I'm so committed to educating what psilocybin is, that it comes from mushrooms, that in most places in the United States, some type of it grows in the wild, so that we don't continue to give our power away to the medicalized systems, that it's the only way, because that's typically what we're sold. And then we're still continuing this compartmentalized version of consciousness, but I don't think that it's the only way. I just want people to be informed. My goal is that they are informed, because as more people leave traditional religion, they're still looking for another god of sorts. And so if it goes to the plant medicines, then it's dysfunctional too. It's finding the power within the self and collaborating with these master teachers. That's why for me, I don't call it plant medicine. For me, they're master teachers that can illuminate where I am diseasy, where I am not safe, where I'm not feeling fulfilled, where I may need to have some conversations. But I come to them as a student, not a patient. Tremendous healing can happen for sure. So for us to separate shamanism and science doesn't make sense either. For me, there is nothing not scientific about mysticism. At some point, a shaman said, "Oh, I wonder if I combine these two." Right? They tested it. They had an hypothesis, or they saw it in a dream, or they had an inspiration. It's the lack of education that bothers me. It's that this separation from. And when I look at most of the scientific medicalized models, then it's predominantly white males that are in it, that are conducting the science, that are also the ones participating in most of the science. And so that's for me where when someone asks me, I want to see the research, and I'm like, well, that's fine, but let's talk about who the research is actually done by and for who and for what, because science is based by money, because they have an intention that they want as far as an outcome. That's how they get the funding. And so in mysticism, the opportunity is, what would it mean for us to integrate both? What would it mean for us to be in the yes and, not the or, but to say that maybe if one person has they're diabetic, they've got other contraindications, they may be better in a medicalized model that didn't have to be absent of shamanism and mysticism. And so this is where it's going to be interesting to watch, because a lot of times people will start to think that they're like getting stomped on for their religion, when really I've supported lots of Mormons, for example, to embrace their religion more through psychedelics, because they recognize now what it really is to be Christ, to be, that essence and the embodiment of that. And they want to go and actually influence the church and the community that they're in, because they understand it deeper and they see the gifts of the religion. They merely see humans got a little sidestepped. So that is my hope, is to see more of this. We don't have to choose and throw the baby out with the bathwater either way, but it's going to require, whether it's the doctor or the facilitator, to actively choose to learn more, and then bring those voices forward and share them.
Yeah. What, if you had to define the meaning of the way of the healer, what does that mean for you?
When I really sink into the way of the healer, it's that calling on the path, that it's a lifelong calling, just like facilitation is. Even if someone wants to serve medicine, you get the call, you step onto the path, but that doesn't mean serving today. It means, what do I need to know, do, be, or understand for this vision? Who do I need to be to hold space for these people that I'm destined to hold space for? What do I need to do to fortify my body to be here as long as possible? Because our healers are dying young, 50s, 60s. And for me, it's the United States, we need our elders. We don't really have any here for the culture that's been here the last couple hundred years. And so for me, this is also the path of the healer is also the path of the elder, of what it is, this new crone energy for this culture, for this society, where we're bridging so many of our cultural backgrounds into a path that we're all starting to walk, maybe for the first time in American history, as far as United States history. Of that, for me, feels like the path of the healer in this context.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so very much. Oh, we could talk for hours, which means I'm going to have you back for another episode on all the other things that I'd intended to have this conversation about. So much that you can learn from Ta and Kole at the Condor Approach. Those links will be made available for you at the bottom of this page, wherever you're viewing it. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, of course, you'll be able to double back to the show notes page to be able to find each of all of the links. They're all over social media, so you'll be able to just search for them to find them as well. And by all means, whether if you are in this space and you're in this space or curious about this space and what do you do next and how do you learn and how do you integrate, you want to check out the Condor Approach. There's so much there for you. So I encourage each and every one to do that. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I mean, just if anyone listening is hearing the call, to answer it, you'll get just follow one breadcrumb at a time and you'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. I love how my breadcrumbs led me to you. So that's what happens when you start to follow the breadcrumbs. So, and with that said, I hope that all of you all listening will continue to follow the breadcrumbs and listen to all of the other amazing guests that we have here on The Way of the Healer. Kole, thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for watching and listening. Have a great day. Did you know this podcast is a part of an even larger docuseries? Yep, there's an entire documentary underway called The Way of the Healer, where I introduce you to extraordinary women from around the world who are transforming lives with the use of plant medicine and psychedelics. You can learn more about it at thewayofthehealer.com. Thanks for being a part of my day and for listening. Be sure to check out the website, thewayofthehealer.com, for more details, useful tools and links, free resources, and more. Disclaimer: The Way of the Healer Conversation for Change podcast and its host and guests are providing this information for educational purposes only. We do not condone nor condemn the selling, purchase, or use of any substances that are considered outside of legal acquisition or usage. We encourage discretion and safety when involving yourself or others with substances and activities that are deemed illegal by your official local government laws and agencies. It is your responsibility to research and know applicable laws.